Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. The presentation is going to run approximately 45 minutes, and we're going to have 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please utilize your chat box to the right of your interface, and we will save those to the end. So thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it over to our presenter.
Thanks, Mandy.
Thanks, Mandy.
A little sound check.
You can hear me?
And you should be seeing the front page of the deck titled Walls to Wheels, Extending Food Safety Across Your Supply Chain. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. My name is Blair Thomas, and I'm with Jim Gajimski from Columbian. We'll introduce ourselves further in a minute. I just wanted to start off by saying the content we're delivering today was really a product of multiple things, multiple avenues. It was some customer feedback that we had. It was an SQF International Conference speaking engagement that we have coming up the first week of November in Indianapolis, as well as some internal expertise that we kind of pulled all together and said, this is really something we think the marketplace would like to know about and learn more about. So glad that you felt the same way, and thanks for joining us. Agenda here today, we're going to talk a little bit about, just very quickly, about who we are at Columbian and what we do, environmental changes in the food safety and food production world, a few slides on building a food safety culture, and then we'll talk a little bit about a network analysis and how to dive into both up and down your supply chain, and we'll give a lot of real robust examples there, and we'll wrap it up and provide Q&A. So hopefully this is an hour well spent. Quickly about us, at Columbian Logistics Network, we are based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We're an asset-based third-party logistics provider specializing in food logistics. What that means is we run warehouse facilities and transportation programs, both in our own buildings that we own, as well as buildings that we lease, as well as customer sites and that sort of thing. We also operate transportation assets that we own and transportation assets that we lease. And we also have a non-asset transportation group, or a brokerage group. That broad range of services allows us to work pretty deeply with a lot of our clients, and a lot of those clients that we work with are food processors, growers, and manufacturers. So we spend a lot of time in the food world, and we take it very, very seriously here at Columbian. We store, handle, and transport raw pack and whip inventory for large food processors and manufacturers like Kellogg's and General Mills. And we were driven sort of in the food safety world to AIB compliance. A lot of people are familiar with the American Institute of Baking in the early 90s, and that really from there kind of has matured in a very deliberate way to where we stand today, where we are SQF Level 2 certified. SQF is the Safe Quality Food Institute, a fairly rigorous program of standards and audits that says it puts us essentially on par with our actual food production counterparts. We're also organic certified through Oregon Hill. So it's just a little bit about us and our bona fides here. Why are we here? Well, first of all, we're here to learn a little bit. We're going to review the areas of the supply chain that have the most risk, and especially those outside your four walls, right? A framework for extending food safety up and down your supply chain, sort of a mantra to carry through as you look at your network. Jim's got plenty of, he's armed and dangerous with real world examples of how to mitigate risks, as well as we'll talk a little bit about how to get started. And I think, I love this image here on the slide that you're seeing, because we thought about even doing a what's wrong with this picture. What you see here is a good example of why we're here today. Here you have a guy who's loading a trailer of what looks to be a finished good food product with gaping holes of daylight between the back of the truck and the truck dock itself. That would never happen in an SQF or an AIB compliant facility, but you really have to be careful to make sure that that's not happening both up and downstream in your supply chain. So it's kind of a fun picture that's, you know, just a stock image, but that would never happen in a building that we run or that our counterparts would run. So what brought us here? So shifting focus, right? Food safety initiatives, just like many initiatives across the business world these days, especially if you turn an eye towards continuous improvement or lean, a lot of what businesses are preaching is shifting towards prevention from reaction. And that carries true with audit systems like SQF and AIB, right? So Safe Quality Foods and the American Institute of Baking. I'll use those acronyms several times today. But what we see is that those Audit systems and those programs, and including HACCP plans, right, hazard analysis critical control points, they all tend to be focused on what happens within your four walls of your own facility. And if you're a processor of food, you certainly have some risk both up and downstream in the supply chain. You have some risk coming from your vendors, as well as you have some risk going downstream towards your customers. So your supply chain extends well beyond those four walls. And so what's the challenge, right? So the challenge a lot of us ask is, how do you extend food safety and your food safety principles across your partner network and maintain the same level of product integrity you have within your four walls? So let's set the table for that with a little bit of framework here. First of all, building a culture of safety. First thing we've done, we found a very successful methodology here at Columbian, is to start with a champion. Again, just like any initiative in the business world, if you have one person or one group or one focus that says, this is something that's important to me, I'm deputized to make sure that it's important around the organization, it tends to get a lot of traction. You have somebody who's passionate about it. So find someone to be your food safety champion within your organization who manages compliance standards and has cross-departmental jurisdiction. And what that does is that provides fearless reporting. So employees have to be able to report non-compliances without the fear of reprisal. So, for example, in our business, if our food safety champion reported directly to one of our facility managers of the multiple facility managers that we have, there might be some gain to be had in lying or twisting the truth or that sort of thing for one specific facility as opposed to another, especially if that person's rewards program was based on scores and compliance. So Jim will talk a little bit about that later on, about how we avoid that and what we do to combat that. But it's definitely something that you've got to have in place, and you've got to be very deliberate about. Once you have that person, give that person a structure, right? So what does the structure of your organization look like? And is it built on a culture of safety, on a structure of safety and a culture of safety? So here at Columbian, we run what we call an exposure mitigation group. This is a cross-functional group. It includes corporate people, warehouse people, transportation people, some customer service group as well, various other folks, including executive management, that says, hey, let's look across our business within the organization and say, where is it that we are exposed to risk? Where is it that we have something that, even if it's something that just doesn't quite feel right, this is the forum we use for people to bring those forward and say, it's not necessarily a personal safety issue like an OSHA compliance issue. It's not necessarily a customer requirement issue. It's something that just doesn't feel right. So in addition to the exposure mitigation group, we have a group of dedicated food safety professionals, and that's something those are those champions that we're talking about. And those people do not report straight to the facility management. They actually report straight to Jim, who's sitting here with me. So an exposure mitigation team, it looks for risk across all the areas, including equipment, worker safety, financial stability, right? So those are things we're really looking out for the well-being of the organization, and it's something that feeds off of the food safety culture, and they become something that they kind of grow together. So once you've got that people or persons or person in place, you've got a structure that empowers them and enables them. What's the mantra? What's the gospel that they're preaching, if you will? And no matter what part of your supply chain that you're evaluating, there's a simple framework that we like to use to help ensure compliance, and that is communicate, evaluate, and improve. You'll hear Jim talk about that several times here. Communicate with both up and down supply chain, evaluate the effectiveness of any partnerships that you have or any programs that you have, and improve them when necessary, right? Sometimes it doesn't necessarily need improving. It's just a maintenance situation, but sometimes improving can be a hard thing to do. So pulling all those together, the people or the person or the persons, the structure that they work in, the framework that they use to go about their business, give them the ability to perform a network analysis. So this is a very simple supply chain network that you have. And you see down here, if you can see my cursor, we're saying that this is the plant down here at the bottom of the screen. That's what we're talking about when it comes to the four walls. What's the production environment look like? But in this very simple picture, every building is a node in the supply chain, and every road represents the movement of product. So maybe you've got a supplier or a group of suppliers. That supplier might be sending products to a warehouse or multiple warehouses, right? That goes via a carrier over the road. It comes into the warehouse or multiple warehouses. Maybe one's refrigerated and one is dry, something like that. And then those warehouses are feeding raw and WIP materials into the production plant. Production plant goes about its business. Maybe you're making cereals, maybe you're making candies, whatever it is. And then at some point it becomes a finished good. It cases on pallets, goes into a distribution center, whether that's your distribution center or your customer's distribution center. And from there it goes on to the customer. And again, that might be a customer distribution center, or it might be direct to store, depending on things like shelf life and product variety and things like that, and customer base. One group of people we can't forget, we can't leave out, and that is, we could have put this little insignia outside of pretty much every one of the nodes in this network, but that's the service suppliers, right? And these are a big group when it comes to representing supply chain risk. These are the folks who may or may not be conditioned to work in a food safety, in a food grade warehouse. They are people who aren't typically used to dealing with SQF and HACCP programs. And so you got to pay very, very careful attention to those folks. So let's go one by one. Suppliers, right? And when we say suppliers, we mean suppliers, these are companies who are providing raw materials, feedstocks. It might be a milled grain, it might be oats, it might be salt, sugar, fat, whatever it is that they're supplying for your food production processes. But these are the people from which you are buying inputs for your production. And one thing that we see because we are the eyes and ears on the front lines of the receiving process for our clients, because we do run those upstream warehouses in many cases, is labeling and product identification. We've seen time and time again where something that is perhaps an organic product comes in and isn't labeled as such, or vice versa, that non-organic product is labeled as such. And it's not necessarily a problem that came from us or comes from our customer, but it's the supplier they're buying from. So understanding what labeling and how you're going to identify product that comes in is very, very important. And then also, basically, every time you receive a batch of inbound raw material products, what's the certificate of analysis process look like, and how is that COA going to be administered? Most of you, if anyone here is in the food business, you're probably familiar with COAs. And you really got to track not necessarily that the COAs came, but it's how are those COAs being administered and what's the chain of custody on those. When it comes to supplier compliance tactics, certainly inbound trailer inspections are a big, big piece of what we do on the warehousing side. And if you have an outsourced warehouse, I implore you to go ahead and do that as well. And then what are the reporting and tracking requirements that are necessary, whether it's your warehouse or a third-party provider who runs it for you. Okay. On the supplier side, the last piece we have here is batch tracking, right? So this kind of rolls in conjunction with the certificate of analysis. With a batch tracking agreement, you've got to understand what data you're going to use, how you're going to use it, how you're going to convey that data throughout your business process, because that becomes basically the information of record once that product walks into your circle. And then finally, master data. Having a robust item master file is a big, and a robust bill of materials on your end is a big driver for a stable workplace when it comes to managing your suppliers and your vendors. Jim, you want to talk a little further about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that when you're talking about dealing with suppliers, or as we refer to it, the ship from, because it could be a ship from right from the actual supplier or one of their warehouses in between, as you saw in the network analysis, is having a pretty good, vigorous inbound trailer inspection process. And one of the things that we do during that process is we track everything in what we call Yard View, which is our yard management system. It manages our yards, our doors, as well as trailer tracking and our appointments. And throughout our inspection process, if we have to reject trailers either because of product issues on the trailer and or because the trailer itself maybe has holes in it, has airline problems, leaks, whatever, to make it non-food grade status. We track that in YardView, so that's kind of part of the evaluation process we talked about earlier. But then from there, we take it a step further. We send out monthly reports to our customer in the communication phase to say, here's all the rejections we saw, for this facility or this campus, but for your carriers. And then from there, we also go to each individual carrier and we send them a list of, here's the half dozen trailers or whatever it is that were rejected in the last month, the status of those, what was wrong with them, and communicate with them really on what we can do to get those picked up, fixed, and put back into the circle so we can improve the whole process. So Blair, also you mentioned earlier about recalls due to mislabeling. That's after it comes off the trailer and it's now in your house. One of the things our exposure mitigation team recently went to is because we're receiving from suppliers or suppliers' warehouses where they may ship to multiple customers and that product labeling isn't customer unique, it's back to that supplier's part number, we saw an opportunity for risk of receiving the wrong thing, for instance, of how it's labeled as one way or the other. And I think a common assumption when you have a packing list that a warehouseman may use when they're out there receiving the product is, does it mostly match? Okay, check it off and go. We went to a blind receipt process to make sure that we took that extra step in the process to protect the food chain. Even though it was some added time, we saw the risk was too high not to put that time into it, and basically write down exactly what we see and then take the evaluation part into the office to compare against our customer system, our warehouse management system of what was expected to really make sure we got that match of what was supposed to come and what did come.
Great, good stuff. Let's move along to the next node in the chain, if you will, in the network that we had shown. And I really want to just break right off of the lanes themselves and talk about those plant and service providers. Again, these guys can be a very sticky wicket for people who are trying to manage internal programs, because this is a spot where it's not necessarily just food that's sort of penetrating your four walls, but it's outside people, and people, certainly are prone to making mistakes. Service providers can often go unnoticed, but they have to be a robust part of your food safety plan, especially people, garbage vendors, vending machines, right? So where are you allowing vending machines, and what are you allowing in those vending machines? Certainly any external sanitation providers you have, if you outsource your janitorial services, and then especially mechanical, right? So mechanical vendors are often working with oils or lubricants or foreign materials and foreign substances that you really just don't want cross-contaminating with food products. So in order to build compliance with valuable partners, you've got to have a well-documented vendor management policy. I think Jim's going to talk about that in a second. But in many cases, it's important to require background checks, right?
Yes. And, a lot of companies take a look at their contractor program and maybe tie it specifically to what I'd call their OSHA safety program. If I've got a vendor coming in specifically like on the mechanical or the repair side, are they going to follow our hot work procedure, our confined space procedure, emergency evacuation rules, stuff like that? But we really tied our contractor policy into our food defense plan to make sure, as well as our food safety plan, to basically mandate adherence to all of our policies, procedures, outside of just the safety aspect. When we deal with chemicals in a food plant, you have to make sure that any chemicals that are brought in are approved chemicals ahead of time. So if there is a spill or something's left behind, it's not something that could contaminate. We want to make sure all of our vendors adhere to our GMPs, that they adhere to our glass and brittle plastics policy, and then again, back to the point of the security. If they're working on a machine in a production plant that is feeding off of a silo onto a conveyor system, there's a risk that somebody may do something, from a bioterrorism standpoint, that you need to make sure your contractors run a vigorous background check the same way you do on your own employees, because you're giving them access to the same spots your employees are going to. So that ties again into the whole evaluate and communicate process, that you look at who you're bringing in, what are the areas of risk, and then communicate back with those vendors to make sure that they're basically up to snuff on if it was your own employee doing it.
Right, and this is one of those spots where improving occasionally comes down to see you later.
Yeah, I'll get a new one.
Yep. Next, I want to talk to carriers a little bit, right? So this often can be called the rusty link in the supply chain. When it comes down to it, trailers and trucks and trailers are very much a shared commodity. We, as purchasers of transportation services, meaning shippers, have very little control over what happens with a trailer, both before and after it hauls a specific load. Right, so trailers are shared commodities. Wait times and delays at various pickup points or various stop points, those can become areas for risk for intrusion or food defense issues. Certainly, long delay times and driver reset times and things like that can become temperature control issues. Or if you have a refrigerated trailer that is on the fritz and not working properly, and you're in the middle of the road somewhere. These are all these different things that can come to fruition, and they're not necessarily all that uncommon. So it's really important to have a good strong hold on who your carrier base is. And a lot of people talk about going to the LTL market these days because freight capacity is so tight across the country. Over the utilization of the LTL market to close capacity gaps, it does bring a higher risk for food and beverage manufacturers because it is very high touch. You have relatively long delays, but with going with your line hauls and then the terminals, you do end up with a significantly higher risk level, which may come at the cost of at better costs, but you have to weigh those factors. One thing I want to dig a little deeper into is a clean trailer process. This is something we did for a client that went over pretty well, and we basically said this customer of ours has an elevated level of sensitivity when it comes to the cleanliness of the trailer itself as well as the cleanliness of the warehouse. But one thing we wanted to do is we wanted to give them transportation capacity that said, yes, we are certifying that these trailers have been appropriately inspected and they've been appropriately tracked. So what we put together is sort of a 4-step clean trailer process where we start with a DOT and mechanical inspection. So these trailers don't even enter the pool for this client without having that thorough inspection to say that even from the beginning, they're ship, shape, and seaworthy and ready to roll for this client. Step 2 is an external food safety trailer inspection. So again, this is a luxury we have as being a warehouse and transportation provider. We're able to take resources from one side of our business to audit the other in a very independent way that says, hey, I've taken a look at this trailer. I'd be comfortable loading it from a warehouseman's perspective, from an SQF Level 2 certified facility perspective, and I certify that this is a clean trailer. Step 3 goes back to YardView, the system that Jim mentioned earlier, in terms of tracking those trailers and tracking exactly which moves those trailers are doing throughout the course of the business day and week. And then step 4 is a customized customer seal process. So it's a very robust start to finish process that ensures for this client that the trailers that they're getting are certified as clean and ready to go for their fairly highly sensitive food products. So, but how do you implement a clean trailer policy with common carriers, right? So this is something that's a little bit of a juxtaposition, that says that's all well and good when you have a captive trailer pool. But I think Jim's got some anecdotes about how we take some of those concepts and apply them to the broader context, especially when it comes to brokerage.
Sure. We have a brokerage group within our company that handles food and non-food business. So they have many carrier partners they're working with. And as the food business grew, what they were finding was an increase in the amount of trailer rejections, either when delivering or when going to pick up, kind of scratching their head as to what's going on, because this trailer was fine when I delivered 2 locations ago. So in communicating internally about what's going on and what we do and what we see versus what they see, we were able to basically take our trailer inspection process on the inbound and the outbound side. We shared that with the brokerage group, who again communicated that back to all their carrier partners and made it part of the tendering process that you're picking up food and that it's very important that you meet all of this criteria when you're picking up or delivering food. Otherwise, you're going to get rejected. Because if you were coming to our building, we would reject you. So even though you may not be going to our building, you're going somewhere else, you need to be held to these same standards. Once we put that in place, we went back, evaluated what happened to the rejection rate, and it dropped considerably just with that shared communication.
Great. So again, kind of putting a button on carriers, these guys really can be the rusty link. And when it comes to, obviously if you can get yourself into a private or a dedicated fleet situation, that's going to come with the highest level of safety and security and cleanliness. It also tends to come with a bit of a higher premium because of that guaranteed capacity. If you can't do that, getting into some common carrier programs like Jim just talked about is a good place to start. And then finally, the LTL marketplace can be a lot like the Wild Wild West when it comes to how your freight is handled, and especially when it comes to how little control you have over it. So really, really a hot button there when it comes to looking outside your four walls. Getting towards the end of the network here, we'll talk a little bit about sort of distribution centers. And this is the distribution center can come in sort of two flavors. And one would be something that you run yourself as an organization, or one that you outsource to a third-party provider. But either way, if you've picked the right provider, you've built yourself a sturdy platform from which to serve your customers. And by sturdy platform, we mean that you know that you have product that's of good integrity. You know that you have product that is in a film wrap or a sack wrap of some sort, that is in a shipper box, that is in a case, that is on a pallet, that is stretch wrapped as it arrives to a downstream distribution center. Essentially, you've put the effort in, and now you have a nice sort of platform from which to serve your customers. So this tends to be a relatively lower risk node in the chain, especially as it relates to carriers. But it's not one that should be overlooked, because this is one where communicating and improving come into play pretty significantly. If you're outsourcing your downstream distribution center, we really recommend that you monitor prerequisite programs like their HACCP program, hazard analysis, critical control points, their GMPs, their good manufacturing practices. Those types of programs, at the very, very least, should be in place. They should be auditable by the 3PL, and you should be talking about them on a regular basis. And it is certainly well within your rights to require at least AIB audits and food grade certification. SQF certification tends to be one that is more applicable to warehouses that store raw materials, but at least AIB audits and food grade certification when it comes to a finished goods distribution center really ought to be in play there, and that's not unreasonable to ask of your 3PL. And when it comes to providing controls for that downstream distribution, look for a provider that's got a plan in place that meets your needs. There's no need to reinvent the wheel here. It's not necessarily something that is brand new, especially at that distribution center level. You need to understand your level of tolerance when it comes to shared versus dedicated space. That's actually not unlike what I talked about with carriers when it comes to dedicated fleet versus common carrier networks. Are you willing to have your products be in a facility where they're mixed and mingled with other client products? Do you have issues related to smell or some other factor where your product could be compromised when it comes in close contact with other client products? So that's a decision you need to make, and most 3PL providers are willing and able to make arrangements to accommodate either, as long as you're very clear and you're very communicative. Discuss with your current provider, where the gaps are between their current plans as well as your needs. Right? It's a very easy thing to do, especially at the front end of a relationship. But if you're on the back end of a relationship, or if you're in a relationship with a vendor, really do have to, again, this is that improved section, build compliance or replace, right? Jim talked about getting contractors out of the building who wouldn't comply with some of our rigorous standards. This is another situation where sometimes that just has to happen. And then at the very, very least, if you're going to use a provider, an external provider, or even if you're running it yourself, corrective action programs can go a long way towards establishing some baseline of integrity when it comes to food safety at the distribution center. Jim, you want to expand on that?
Sure. So this is a point now where we start going from the walls to the wheels, and you're going to take product inside your facility that has been audited, you have all the programs, or your provider has all the programs in place, and you're putting it onto a trailer. At that point, this is where if you don't have that certified clean trailer process that we talked about before, you need to have a very vigorous outbound trailer inspection process to make sure that you're loading that food onto a trailer that can hold food, keep it safe to get to that end point. I'll share a story with you that where we thought we had everything buttoned up and we found we didn't, but we went through the process and fixed it to where now we think we do. So typically when a trailer comes to pick up, you do an inspection, and again, outside of that certified clean trailer process, there's probably some debris on the floor that you will sweep up, vacuum up before you load. One issue we found is that at one point there was some glass on a trailer and somebody had swept it out of the trailer, saw that it was all gone, went ahead and loaded the product, and moved on to deliver it. Once they shut those doors, put a trailer seal on it, it was good. Got to the end destination after going hundreds of miles down our bumpy freeways, and when they popped the doors open, there was glass all over the tail of the trailer. Couldn't believe how that could have happened. As we looked into this, investigated, what we found is when you sweep glass out of a trailer, you get right back to the tail of the trailer. There's a little tiny lip there between where the wood will meet the metal, whatever you want to call it, frame, and it got stuck in those grooves. And then again, hundreds of miles driving down bumpy roads with start and stops, that just rattles right out. We realized at that point we had to do something different. So again, evaluating the whole process, we came back, we went to looking at our exposure mitigation group, brought it to them, generated some ideas, and what we came up with was we revamped the way we do our trailer inspections. We have a trailer sign-off sheet. When drivers come, they must first state that and sign off they have not hauled glass on that trailer before. If they have, we don't load it. They have to go get a different trailer. From there, if we're sweeping the trailer off or during the inspection, we find glass, we reject it at that point. It's not eligible to be swept off and cleaned off. That trailer is logged in our yard view system, and it is not allowed to be returned to Columbian in the future. The carrier will be forced to get something up just because the risk is too high, and we made sure we communicated that with all of our carriers, our customers, and their carrier partners, because food safety is just too much of a risk to mix with non-food trailers. And again, when you talk about shared commodity of the assets and the trailers out there, you have to be very careful of what was hauled before your load, because something could linger that you're not aware of.
Good example. And moving on to the final node in the chain, or in the network, if you will, customers. And we struggled. Do we put customers into this group, and do we not put customers into this group, right? Because by the time your products hit the customer dock, largely you've already sold that product to the customer, and it is now their products, right? The chain of ownership has changed hands. But at the end of the day, they are worth looking at. They shouldn't be overlooked, because customer bases change over time, and you must ensure compliance with your customers' requirements periodically, right? So just as we don't have the same client base here at Columbian as we did 5 years ago, you might not have your same customer base 5 years from now. And programs that you put in place at the outset of a relationship may or may not still be viable, and may or may not still be compliant with various changes, especially environmental or regulatory changes over time. So what do we recommend is communicate within and across your customer organizations for dynamic changes, right? So we recently had a client that went to, that decided in light of the Food Safety Modernization Act, they wanted to be sort of ahead of any implementation regulations, and they were going to have put in a finished product pathogen testing program that essentially is more thorough and more robust than any of their prior testing programs were. What this did essentially was, the risk was, hey, this could stop up the inventory from moving down the stream in the supply chain if we don't figure out some other way to handle this. So you're working with the client, communication, improvement of the relationship. This is a situation where improvement didn't necessarily mean kicking someone to the curb. It meant we had to make some changes in our warehouse management system to allow the overlapping hold statuses and layered statuses within our system to match what that client was doing in SAP. We got over the hump. We've gone live with that, and that's been about a year now that that's been in place, and it has been performing smoothly. So it's just, again, one of those situations where a program that was put in place at the outset of a relationship was no longer sufficient to serve the customer. Talk about it. Don't let it fester until it causes a major problem. Get out ahead of it and be in communication with your customers, because sometimes you got to drag them through the mud when it comes to how they're going to handle regulatory changes. Preserving product integrity and relationships. This is one final sort of piece of advice is think about your annual business reviews with your customers, right? So if you're making a cereal product and you've got Kroger, Winn-Dixie, and Safeway as clients of yours, most likely somebody in your organization is doing an annual business review, a top-to-top meeting. It might be more frequent than annually. Whatever it is, you've got some regular high-level review of the business. And those often will come with measurements of how much volume did we do, how much money did we save you, those sorts of what was our case fill rate, performance metrics, and that sort of thing. I strongly encourage organizations to bring food safety, especially food safety successes, into those business reviews. Establish service metrics that consider SQF compliance, or whatever your audit system is, because what it shows is at the executive level, this is just as important as case fill rate. This is just as important as gain shares, just as important as employee turnover, because it really is a bellwether as to the health of the organization. And it looks good on you when you can come to a customer that says and say, hey, look, we've had no real issues and no recalls and things like that. So that's something we strongly recommend as we look up and down the supply chain. So to wrap up, this was just kind of a quick review: supplier, carrier, warehouse, service provider, plant, distribution center, carrier, and customer. All these guys, we've talked about every single one of these nodes in the network, and we've thought about, hey, what is it that I can do to ensure compliance with my programs as I work through the supply chain? And so
so kind of just to bring it full circle here, as a third-party logistics company, we ship to our customers, but we also ship to our customers' customers. So if you go back to the map and you look at all those points in the process and all the opportunities for risk, we shared with you some of our challenges, some of our success stories as far as how we communicate, evaluate, and improve when it comes to trailer inspections, working with carriers, using our yard management system to track, share, and improve who we use for carriers, what we do with contractors, as well as we've got the dedicated, what we call our product integrity team, where we took the inventory control functions and the food safety functions, put them into one department, reporting outside of the local facilities to really hold ourselves accountable, almost as an external audit team that comes in and looks at our operations, and then also the cross-functional exposure mitigation team. I think that's really important when you bring all the different components of your company together to look at any risk in the supply chain, because what one person thinks of, the other one may not. Whatever happened to one place could happen to somebody else, maybe outside of the four walls. Again, bringing your transportation group into there, as well as thinking about what's next or what if.
Great. Thanks, Jim. So to wrap it up, maintaining the integrity of your products and your food, both up and down the supply chain, there is a lot of change going on out there in the marketplace right now, and it's going to take a lot of work. And remembering the reason can sometimes make us all feel a little more sane. Food safety is our highest priority, right? The last thing anybody organization wants is to be in the news for a recall or a big outbreak of something, not necessarily for the bad PR, but you just don't want to do that with your customers, right? And it's something that we all take very, very seriously. So while programs that are out there do a great job of focusing on what goes on inside the plant or inside the campus, you really do need to keep your eyes focused on what goes on outside your four walls, both up and down the supply chain. And if you want to talk more, if you want to learn more, if you need more materials than what we've provided today or what we can answer in the questions coming up, feel free to reach out to us. We put Sarah's name in there. She's sort of our most reliably available person if you need to, and she's also fully capable of, delegating the questions that come in or requests that come in. So we said reach out with her. 616-514-1904 is her direct line. Her email, our website is there. You can engage with us on Twitter at Columbian HQ as well. So with that, we will take some questions from the group. It looks like we've had a few pretty good ones come in. So I think at random we will we'll start here. The question, and I don't know who has posed these, so they're fully anonymous. But the question was, are there FDA regulations that require destruction of food products in the event that the chain of custody is breached? And if there is a breach, can food be salvaged?
Yeah, as far as I am aware, and again, as a 3PL, we don't take ownership of the product. Our customers always maintain ownership. So that may be more of something that the actual owner would know more about. I know for us that if we get something in and the chain of custody has been broken, we typically do not take the product in. So from that point, it is returned, sent back to the supplier or whatever warehouse it came from, and that really happens outside of our four walls. So that's kind of a tough question as a 3PL for us to be able to answer.
Yeah, usually our reaction to a breach like that is to follow customer orders, right? So it's for those who own the product and have that duty of care, we look for direction from that group for many cases.
But I think that ties right into another question we had, that how are most food companies handling broken seals when they arrive, and do they reject or inspect and receive? And again, by customer, by commodity, what we're looking at, I can't think of an instance on the food ingredient side, if it shows up with a broken seal, that we take that in. It's automatically rejected. And again, we have multiple food customers, and all of them say the seal must be put in place. We've even got it to the point that, the driver is not, when I say the driver, the delivering truck driver is not allowed to break the seal. It is our employee that must go out, witness breaking the seal, verify the seal against the paperwork to make sure they match, and then go ahead and start the trailer inspection process before you unload. Because even if you break the seal, if there is something wrong inside the trailer, that could still force a rejection, even if the seal was intact. As far as the outbound side goes, again, as a 3PL, we are in a position to follow our customers' directives, which is very similar on the inbound side. We put the seal on. We don't hand the seal to the driver and have them go out and apply it on the trailer, because we don't know if they're doing it at that point or 5 miles down the road at a truck stop. So it must be a physical employee that walks out, seals the trailer, matches it against the paperwork with the driver witnessing, because they are the ones signing and taking custody.
Jim, let me dig a little deeper on that. You talked about ingredient deliveries with broken seals being rejected sort of outright. If it's a load of corrugate boxes or something that is not necessarily something that comes in contact with food, are you finding that customers are looking for the same level of rejection criteria, or does that tend to vary?
That tends to vary, especially if you get LTL deliveries who do not seal and reseal at most stops, and they're the ones that are usually delivering the non-food contact packaging situations like that. That won't arrive with a seal, or if it does and there's an issue, again, if it's not something that touches food, but it's just the outside box or reusable totes that have, product in a liner inside of that, then usually it's an inspect process before it's received. But it's always done with communication with our customer first to make sure, that's in fact what they want to do.
Good. Let's move on to the next one. This one came in. It says, is there any pressure from industry on carriers to maintain product recall insurance? I'll be honest, I have not seen that as a requirement to date. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of that coming down the pipe yet or not. But
I know it's definitely being talked about with some of our larger customers on the warehousing side. That because usually if there's a recall, something happened during production or during storage. If something happened while it was on the truck, hopefully on these earlier questions where a seal was not intact and you were able to, drill down to when the adulteration happened, then it would be a load that was rejected, which wouldn't necessarily drill back to a recall. However, if something happens within the warehouse, it makes it to production, and it could be potentially something that down the line is done with a recall. Yeah, we are in talk with our major food manufacturing companies about what it would take to get recall insurance and what what all is involved there. It's definitely something that is coming up more now than it did 2 years ago or 5 years ago.
Okay. I don't have any more to add than that one, so let's keep going. Here's a good one that just came in. So the question is something along the lines of, how do you keep vendors, and by vendors I think we're talking about sort of service providers, that group that sort of comes into your building. How do you keep them compliant against constant cost pressure to keep lowest price capabilities when it comes to, I'm guessing, again, garbage, sanitation, floor mats, and vending, whatever else it is. You want to talk through that a little bit?
Sure. I am assuming this question ties back to our contractor policy and what we tie into there. What we really do is, again, it's all about communication. And we start off with talking about that vendor up front before we start the process of using them, of what our expectations are. We don't want to have them show up, start working, and then come in and throw a wrench, no pun intended, into the mix. But basically, we talk to them. We make sure that if you're going to come work in our building, you can't have open wounds. You can't be eating food or having drinks out on the floor around food products if that's the place. We have plenty of signage, but we also, again, we share all of our policies up front that you can't bring glass or brittle plastics into the facilities. The background checks, that's, again, dependent on the type of commodity that we're storing. We have different levels of security by different facilities, and that just goes with the business. One thing we've seen as a company, when it comes even to that visitor sign-in log, and do visitors sign in, and are they with somebody to do a tour? More and more these days, it's no longer just somebody signing in. It's showing them your ID. They take a copy of it. They're making you a badge there at that point. This is the new world today, and there is not a lot of pushback. Everybody understands that, and that is what it takes to play in this industry today. And again, we make it known that these are our rules. There's no bending them. This is what it takes to do business with us, because we have a certain amount of integrity we have to hold your product or our customer's product.
Great. And I think we have time for at least one more. Question came in is, so what exactly is yard view, and how does that play into your food safety program? I'll start here, and Jim can elaborate if necessary. So yard view is a product that we use. It is a SaaS delivered, meaning it's a software as a service delivered yard management system. We use it for a whole bunch of different things, but it does a really good job of maintaining starting with our dock appointments, right? So when a supervisor walks into a warehouse, at 5, 6 a.m. and says, "What does my day look like?" He or she typically will pull up yard view to see, okay, what are my appointments? What are our slots? Who's coming in? And so that's kind of where it all starts. Once a trailer arrives onto the campus, it gets logged in yard view. And then we have a tablet system that uses basically it's a move request system. So once a trailer is in the yard, for example, and the warehouse wants it into a certain dock door, they'll put in a move request. That move request shows up on the tablet in the truck, and the driver goes and grabs that trailer and puts it to the appropriate door. So it's very much an operational system for us that we use in order to expedite what goes on sort of outside of our four walls, but still inside the fence. But it's also a great repository for us when it comes to the transportation assets that are out there and all sorts of different characteristics of those assets. So every trailer that comes onto the campus gets logged, and so we can know things like, okay, how long was it sitting in the yard, especially if we know if it's a reefer trailer versus a dry van. We know certainly how long that trailer is. We know who it belongs to and the trailer number and all those sort of baseline properties. We can look at dwell times and detention times and things like that, all through YardView. We do quite a bit of reporting when it comes to trailer turn times and things like that through it. So it really becomes a fairly robust way to report our transportation assets and what goes on outside the walls for us. And it's delivered as a service, right? Software as a service. So it really is a matter of hitting the internet, and they're ready to go. So it's they are at yardview.com. That we have a good relationship with the folks over there. So if anyone needs more information on that, we can provide that. Just reach out to us later on.
Maybe to tie into that too, for the people that aren't familiar with it, I compare YardView as our warehouse management system for the yard. So it gives you an inventory snapshot, it gives you transaction summaries, it's how your appointments are your orders, the move screens are your warehouse moves within there, but also there's a portal that, again, online, our customers and our customers' carriers can log in as well. So when you're into a campus situation where you build up a trailer pool, we talked before about maybe we're running rejection reports and sharing with our carrier partners. They can log into YardView, see what's wrong with it, see where it's at, real-time visibility. Again, back with the customers, the carriers, and the warehouse, everybody has real-time visibility to what that is. It's been a very, very useful tool in managing the yards as well as managing the food safety of the trailers. And the flow of the day. Yeah. Really. So,
yeah, that's a good one. We work together real well with the folks at YardView, a real strong relationship there. So. And in that note, I think we are going to wrap it up. I'm just going back to the wrap-up slide here. Again, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to contact us. If you want a deeper dive on anything that we've talked about today, or if you want to talk further on any systems or processes. Otherwise, thank you all very, very much for taking time